K9 risks everything to protect his partner, hero of the year. The dim glow of streetlights cast long shadows over the quiet suburban streets, broken only by the soft crunch of boots on asphalt and the faint jingle of a dog's collar. Officer. Jake walked with steady purpose, his flashlight slicing through the gloom. Beside him, Max, a sleek and vigilant German shepherd, moved in perfect sync. His ears were perked, his sharp eyes scanning every flicker of movement. Jake glanced down at his partner, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You sense anything, buddy?" he asked, his voice low and calm. Max didn't respond, of course, but his nose twitched and his tail gave a subtle wag. This was his domain, the quiet streets and hidden corners where danger lurked just out of sight. He was a silent guardian, ever watchful, ever ready. Jake paused at the corner of the street, letting his eyes sweep over the rows of neat houses with their tidy lawns and closed curtains. To an outsider, it looked like a postcard-perfect neighborhood, but Jake knew better. Whispers of illicit activity had reached the precinct, something big, something dangerous. "Looks peaceful," Jake muttered, more to himself than to Max. "Too peaceful." Max huffed softly, his breath visible in the crisp night air. He leaned forward slightly, his nose brushing the ground as he caught faint traces of scents carried on the wind. As they turned a corner, the faint sound of distant laughter reached them, followed by the clink of glass. Jake tensed, his hand instinctively resting on the holster at his side. "Stay sharp, Max," he whispered. The dog's ears swiveled, his entire body coiled like a spring. They moved forward cautiously, their steps deliberate and quiet. The streetlights flickered above them, casting fleeting shadows that danced ominously across the pavement. Suddenly, Max stopped. His body went rigid, his head snapping up. He sniffed the air once, then again, deeper this time. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Jake froze. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his hand tightening on the flashlight. Max didn't look at him. His focus was elsewhere, his eyes locked on a distant alleyway. Jake followed his gaze and saw nothing at first, just the dark outline of a row of buildings. But then he caught it. A faint, acrid smell, like burnt chemicals. His stomach dropped. "Explosives!" he breathed. Max barked sharply, his tail stiff, and began pulling Jake toward the source of the scent. Jake's heart raced as he followed, his senses on high alert. They stopped in front of an old, abandoned warehouse at the edge of the neighborhood. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows shattered and its walls scarred with graffiti. Jake shone his flashlight over the rusted metal door, which hung slightly ajar. "Good find, Max," Jake said, his voice tight. He drew his weapon, his other hand reaching for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "This is Officer Jake. I've got a possible location for illegal activity. Sending coordinates now, requesting immediate backup," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Max let out a soft whine, nudging Jake's leg. He was ready to move, ready to act. Jake nodded, gripping his flashlight tighter. "All right, let's see what's inside." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil, metal, and something sharper, something dangerous. Max moved ahead, his nose to the ground, his every step deliberate. The beam of Jake's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of crates and shelves cluttered with equipment. Max froze again, his body low to the ground, his ears flat against his head. He let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on a corner of the room. Jake followed the dog's lead, his flashlight sweeping over the area. "What the?" Jake muttered as the beam landed on a hidden door, slightly ajar, with faint light spilling out. From within. Jake pushed the door open cautiously, revealing a small room filled with weapons and stacks of what looked like bricks of explosives. His breath hitched. "This is bigger than we thought," he murmured, his hand reaching for the radio. Again. "This is Officer Jake. We've got a major situation, weapons and explosives confirmed. Backup needed ASAP." As Jake surveyed the room, Max's growl deepened. His head swiveled toward the shadows, his body tense. "What is it now?" Jake whispered, his eyes narrowing. Max's gaze darted toward a corner of the warehouse, where the faintest sound of movement reached them. Jake swung his flashlight in that direction, but the beam only illuminated empty space. "Stay close," Jake said, his voice barely audible. Unbeknownst to them, hidden figures watched from the darkness, their eyes gleaming with malicious intent. The quiet was broken only by the faint hum of electricity, a sound that suddenly ceased as the warehouse lights flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. Jake's heart pounded as he whispered, "Max, stay ready." Max growled low and deep, his body a shadow against the blackness. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. Somewhere in the darkness, danger waited, watching and preparing to strike. The warehouse erupted into chaos. The sound of shouts and hurried footsteps echoed off the steel walls as Victor barked orders to his men. Crates toppled over, scattering their contents across the floor as the gang scrambled to escape. Jake crouched behind a stack of barrels, his breath steady, but his eyes sharp. Max stood beside him, his fur bristling and his ears locked on the direction of the noise. Jake whispered, "Ready, boy?" Max let out a low growl, his body taut with anticipation. Jake nodded, gripping his flashlight in one hand and his radio in the other. Suspects fleeing the scene. "Pursuing now," Jake said into the radio, then motioned to Max. "Let's go." Max surged forward, his movements fluid and silent. He weaved through the shadows with practiced ease, his nose twitching as he tracked the gang's scent. Jake followed closely, his flashlight darting across the dimly lit space. In the labyrinth of the warehouse, Max's instincts took over. The faint trace of sweat and gunpowder led him around corners and through narrow aisles. The scent grew stronger, sharper, as he approached a side exit. He stopped abruptly, sniffing the air with urgency. Jake caught up, his breathing heavy. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Max barked once, sharp and precise. Jake raised his flashlight and saw the glint of a metallic tripwire stretched across the floor. "Good catch," Jake murmured. He carefully stepped over the wire, his trust in Max unwavering. They pressed on, but the gang had regrouped. Shadows moved ahead of them, and the clatter of metal signaled their pursuers were arming themselves. Suddenly, a figure darted out from behind a crate. Jake raised his weapon, shouting, "Freeze!" Before he could act further, another figure appeared from his blind side swinging a metal pipe. The blow caught Jake on the shoulder, sending him sprawling to the ground. "Jake!" Max barked, his voice sharp with alarm. The attacker raised the pipe again, but Max lunged, teeth bared. He latched onto the man's arm, forcing him to drop the weapon with a pained cry. Max growled fiercely, his body a wall of protection between Jake and his attackers. Jake groaned, clutching his injured shoulder. "I'm fine, Max. Go!" he said through gritted teeth, motioning toward the fleeing gang. Max hesitated, his eyes flicking between Jake and the retreating shadows. His instinct screamed to stay, to guard his partner, but the scent of Victor's escape lingered heavily in his nose. "Go," Jake urged again, his voice firmer. "You've got this." Max whined softly, then turned, his resolve hardening. He sprinted after the gang, his paws barely making a sound against the concrete floor. As Max chased Victor, flashes of his training played in his mind. Jake's voice echoed in memory. "You're my partner, Max. Out there I trust you to make the call." It was that trust, that bond, that kept Max moving forward. His legs burned, his lungs heaved, but he didn't falter. Every step brought him closer to the scent, to Victor, to justice. The trail led Max to a hidden hatch in the far corner of the warehouse. He sniffed around it, growling softly as he pawed at the edges. The hatch creaked open, revealing a dark staircase leading underground. Max descended cautiously, his ears swiveling at every sound. The bunker was a maze of tight corridors, the air thick with the smell of oil and damp metal. Shadows danced along the walls, and every creak of the floor made Max's muscles tense. Suddenly a loud clang echoed through the bunker. Max froze, his ears pinned back. A trapdoor slammed shut behind him, sealing the exit. He growled low, his eyes scanning the space. Tripwires glinted faintly in the dim light, and the walls seemed to close in around him. "Max!" Jake's voice crackled faintly through the earpiece in Max's collar. "Stay sharp, buddy, you've got this." Max barked softly in response, his tail flicking once. He moved forward, navigating the traps with precision. Victor's guards appeared from the shadows, their footsteps deliberate and their weapons ready. Max faced them head-on, his lips pulling back in a fierce snarl. One lunged at him, but Max dodged, his agility unmatched. He leaped onto the attacker, knocking him to the ground before spinning to face the others. In the chaos, a bullet grazed Max's flank, drawing a yelp of pain. He stumbled but quickly regained his footing. Blood stained his fur, but his determination burned brighter than ever. He couldn't stop now, not with so much at stake. As Max pressed deeper into the bunker, his mind focused on one thought: protect Jake, complete the mission. Despite the pain, despite the odds, Max moved forward. Every step was a testament to his loyalty, his courage, and the unyielding spirit that made him more than just a dog. He was a hero. The air in the bunker was thick, heavy with dust and the tang of oil. Max crept forward, his body low and his every step deliberate. His injured flank throbbed, but he pushed the pain aside, his focus locked on the shadow ahead. Victor stood near a table, his figure illuminated by a single hanging bulb. His hand hovered over a small black device. "Come any closer, Mutt, and we all go up in flames," Victor hissed, his voice cold and steady. Max froze, his sharp eyes narrowing. He growled low, a sound that rumbled from deep within his chest. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the light. Victor smirked, holding the detonator higher. "One step and it's over. You think you're clever, you're just a dog." Max's ears twitched, catching the slight tremor in Victor's voice. He wasn't as confident as he seemed. Max's gaze darted around the room, taking in the scattered tools and equipment. He shifted his weight, calculating his next move. Victor stepped back, his foot knocking over a wrench. The metallic clang echoed, making Max's muscles tense. The man's eyes flicked to the sound, and in that brief moment Max seized the opportunity. With a sharp nudge, he sent a nearby toolbox crashing to the ground, its contents spilling out with a deafening clatter. "What the—" Victor spun toward the noise, his grip on the detonator faltering. Max didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his powerful jaws closing around Victor's wrist. The man screamed, the detonator slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. Max shook his head, forcing Victor to release his grip entirely before dropping the device a safe distance away. "Get off me!" Victor yelled, struggling to push Max away. But Max held firm, his teeth bared as he forced Victor to the ground. The man's strength was no match for the dog's sheer determination. Suddenly a faint beep echoed through the room, followed by a low rumble. Max's ears flattened as the floor beneath them trembled. The explosion was sudden and jarring, a burst of fire and debris that sent Victor sprawling, and Max tumbling backward. The walls groaned as the force of the blast sent chunks of concrete and metal raining down. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to see or breathe. Max scrambled to his feet, his body aching. He barked sharply, the sound muffled by the chaos around him. He moved toward the exit, but a massive slab of rubble crashed down, blocking his path. Above ground, Jake stumbled out of the patrol car, his shoulder still bandaged from the earlier confrontation. Backup officers were already swarming the scene, but Jake's focus was singular. "Max!" he shouted, his voice breaking. He ignored the searing pain in his arm and ran toward the bunker's entrance. The smoke was thick as he descended the stairs, coughing but undeterred. "Max, where are you?" A faint bark reached his ears, muffled but unmistakable. "Jake's." Heart leapt and he surged forward, pushing past debris and calling out. Jake dropped to his knees, his hands clawing at the rubble. "I'm here, buddy. Hold on," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Each piece of debris he moved felt heavier than the last. His hands bled, but he didn't care. He couldn't lose Max. Not now. Not ever. "Come on, Max," he murmured, choking back tears. "I need you." The faint bark came again, closer this time. Jake's hands worked faster, fueled by desperation and love. Finally, a flash of fur appeared beneath the rubble. "Max!" Jake cried, his voice cracking. He grabbed the last chunk of concrete and heaved it aside, revealing Max's battered form. Max's eyes met Jake's, filled with exhaustion but also relief. Jake reached out, gently pulling him free from the wreckage. "You're okay," Jake said, cradling Max in his arms. His tears fell freely now, mixing with the soot on his face. "You're okay." Max licked Jake's cheek weakly, his tail thumping once against the ground. As they emerged from the bunker, the sunlight broke through the smoke, bathing them in a golden glow. Jake held Max close, his heart swelling with gratitude. He looked down at Max, their bond stronger than ever. "Together always," he whispered. Max's gaze was steady, unyielding. It was a promise, a silent vow between partners who had faced the depths of danger and come out stronger. The ambulance rushed down the narrow street, its sirens wailing, cutting through the night like a warning. Jake sat beside Max, his hand pressed against the dog's bloodied side, holding him steady as the vehicle bounced over the uneven road. Max's breathing was shallow, his once vibrant eyes now dull and glazed. The pain was clear on his face, but there was something else, a quiet strength that Jake couldn't ignore. "Hang in there, buddy," Jake whispered, his voice hoarse with worry. "You've made it this far, we're almost there." Max's tail gave a weak thump, a small sign that he was still aware, still fighting. Jake squeezed his partner's paw, the warmth of their shared history between them. The mission, the danger, the bond. They had never been this close to losing each other. At the veterinary hospital, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead as the doors swung open. Jake rushed in, cradling Max carefully in his arms. The staff met them immediately, their faces a mixture of professionalism and concern. "We need a trauma unit now," one of the nurses barked as they wheeled Max away. Jake stood frozen for a moment, the world spinning around him. He could hear the frantic voices of the medical team as they worked on Max, but none of it mattered. Max wasn't just a dog. He was his partner, his friend, his family. "Come on, Max," Jake muttered, clenching his fists at his sides. "You've always pulled through before. You're strong. We're not done yet." Hours passed like days. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the waiting room, and Jake sat there staring at the door to the surgery room. His legs ached, his back felt stiff from sitting, but he didn't move. Max needed him, and Jake wasn't going anywhere. The door finally opened, and the head veterinarian stepped through, a weary look on her face. Jake stood up so fast he almost knocked over his chair. "How is he?" Jake asked, his voice tight with fear. The vet gave him a small, reassuring smile. "He's stable. He made it through the worst of it." Jake let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "So he's going to be okay?" "It's going to take time," the vet said. "There's some internal damage, and he's lost a lot of blood, but we've got him on fluids and pain management. With rest and care, he should recover." Tears welled in Jake's eyes as the weight of it all came crashing down. Thank you so much." Jake didn't leave Max's side once he was moved into recovery. The night was quiet, save for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the soft rustling of the blankets. He had his hand resting gently on Max's paw, whispering to him, occasionally the words a mix of comfort and encouragement. "I'm here, buddy." "So I'm not going anywhere." Max's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. The dog gave a soft whine, then rested his head against the pillow, his breathing a little more even. "You're going to be just fine," Jake murmured, his voice breaking slightly. The hours passed slowly, but with each breath Max took, Jake's heart began to ease. He knew his partner wasn't out of the woods yet, but he could feel a glimmer of hope stirring in his chest. They were going to make it through this just like they always did. The morning light filtered through the hospital window, casting a soft glow over the room. Max stirred again, his eyes opening fully this time. Jake leaned in, his face lighting up with relief. "Hey, there you are," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Max's tail gave a weak thump, and Jake chuckled softly, brushing a hand over the dog's fur. "You've still got that fight in you, huh?" Jake smiled, his heart full. Days passed and Max's recovery was slow but steady. The worst of his injuries were healing, and he was eating again, his eyes regaining some of their usual spark. Jake stayed by his side through every step, just as he had promised. The bond between them had only deepened, forged even stronger by the trials they had endured together. One afternoon, as Max lay resting on the floor, his paw resting against Jake's foot, the vet came in with good news. "He's ready to go home," she said with a smile. "He's healing beautifully." Jake's eyes shone with gratitude. "You're sure he's okay? As long as he gets plenty of rest and care, he should be just fine," the vet reassured him. "But you two are a strong pair. I have no doubt you'll take good care of him." Max's story spread quickly. News outlets picked up on the incredible bond between Jake and Max, their story of courage, loyalty, and survival, capturing hearts. All over the country, people sent messages of support, some with tears in their eyes as they read about the brave dog who had saved lives and the man who would never leave his side. The local town, too, had rallied around them. A ceremony was planned to honor Max, a celebration of his bravery and the friendship that had become legendary. On the day of the ceremony, the air was thick with anticipation. A crowd had gathered in the town square, where law enforcement, officers, families, and animal lovers stood side by side. Jake stood at the front, his hand resting on Max's back as the dog sat proudly by his side. The mayor stepped forward, holding a shiny medal in his hands. "Today we honor a true hero," he said, his voice full of pride. "Max has shown us all the meaning of loyalty, courage, and strength. We are forever grateful for his service." The crowd erupted into applause as the mayor placed the medal around Max's neck. Jake's eyes glistened with emotion as he knelt beside Max, his hand gently resting on the dog's head. "You did it, buddy," Jake whispered, his voice thick with pride. "You're my hero." Later, as the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Jake stood alone with Max, both of them taking in the quiet of the moment. "I don't think we'll ever fully understand what we went through," Jake mused, his hand on Max's fur. "But what I do know is that I wouldn't be here without you." Max's tail thumped against the ground and Jake smiled. "Together always," Jake whispered. The days after the ceremony were filled with recovery and renewal. Max, fully healed and stronger than ever, returned to patrol with Jake. The bond between them had grown unbreakable, their teamwork flawless. Their story had inspired the town and even those beyond to find courage in the face of adversity. But for Jake and Max, it was just another chapter in their unspoken promise to always be there for each other. As the sun began to set one evening, casting long shadows across the town, Jake and Max walked side by side, ready for whatever the future held. Max looked up at Jake, his eyes filled with trust and determination. Jake smiled, a silent promise passing between them. "Whatever comes next," Jake said, his voice soft, "we'll face it together." And with that, the two of them walked into the horizon, their silhouettes blending into the fading light, forever side by side.